I slept all day. When I was awakened, the stars were already shining in the sky that looked out the rocky window of my cave. In the dim light of the oil lamp on the ledge of the wall, I saw Selina standing beside my bed. I jumped up immediately. "Is it night already?" I whispered. "Yes, it is night, amico," replied the girl in a muffled voice. "Soon it will be cold, and I will light the braziers. At night in the mountains one gets a shiver." I heard her voice for the first time. She was still wearing her jasper, which covered the lower half of her face. Looking at her face, I wondered if she was beautiful. "Dinner is ready," said Selina, without taking her eyes off me. She had very black eyes, matching the color of her hair, which was knotted, and pinned up with a silver clasp at the back of her head. I was overcome with desire, but I remembered that I was a guest here, and quickly bent down to put on my boots. Then I poured some water from the water barrel into my palms and rubbed my face with it, then wiped myself with my handkerchief. The girl looked at me in silence, but when I caught her gaze I could not decide whether she was smiling or not. The jasper that covered the lower part of her face prevented me from doing so. I nodded to her that I was ready, and she pulled back the curtain so I could go out. As I passed her and stepped into the large hall, where there were crates and other objects barely visible in the dim light of the primitive oil lamps hanging on the walls, a strange odor hit my nostrils. The girl walked past and led me through this hall into a dark, narrow corridor, where she pointed to a bright glow coming from a hole in the corridor wall. "This way," she said in a muffled voice, and walked away. I walked down the corridor and entered another cave, which was lit by numerous oil lamps and 4 large braziers. Warmth came from the smoldering embers. Abdul, Ibrahim, and some large Arab were sitting around a large bowl of steaming brew. "Buona sera, amici." "Good evening, friends," I said as I came closer. The large man stood up and walked around the bowl to me. 2 swarthy hands clasped mine in a cordial greeting. "Ben Omar," I exclaimed joyfully. "I knew we would meet again," he said in a low voice with a powerful timbre. I smiled when I saw the joy in his eyes. "I promised you, Ben Omar, that if I was sent to this part of Cyrenaica as a messenger, I would come to see you at Barca," I said, and continued, playing a trick on him. "Perhaps you did not believe me. But here I was, not on the orders of my command, but of my own free will. I ran as fast as I could." His large body shook with laughter. "Decent men seem to be doomed to run everywhere. And so are you and I. It's more fun with 2, he assured me. "Now let's eat. I can't offer you much, but any meal tastes better with friends." He helped me off with my boots, and when I sat down beside him, cross-legged, a slight smile tugged at his lips. "You haven't forgotten what I taught you," he said. Abdul and Ibrahim said something quickly to Ben Omar in Arabic, and he turned to me to translate. "My brother and Ibrahim say that you are the only German who has observed the customs of the Arabs in their society. That was last night." I turned to Ben Omar and asked him in Italian, "Have you met any Germans before me?" Upon hearing my question, all 3 Arabs laughed amicably, and I, slightly surprised by this reaction, looked from one of them to the other in bewilderment. Ben Omar put his hand on mine. "We met a lot of Germans," he said. "Now let's eat. We'll talk later," he added with a light chuckle. A large clay bowl was filled to the brim with a hot brew. I guessed from the smell that it was goat meat floating in a thick, fatty sauce that gave off a marvelous odor. Next to it was a small pile of slices of cornmeal bread and another smaller bowl full of crumbly cooked rice. I knew that, as a guest, I should start the meal first, but having neither plate nor spoon, I did not know what to do. In embarrassment, I turned to Abdul. "Please, Abdul, start first. Show me what to do," since Ben Omar did not teach me how to eat in Arabic. The 3 Arabs laughed again, and Abdul said, "Look, stranger, perhaps you will have to live among our people for a long time, and you will like to eat in our way." His eyes sparkled with joy, and he reached into the bowl with his hands and took out a piece of meat. With his other hand, he broke a slice of bread and placed the meat on it so that the sauce wouldn't drip on the floor, then sank his teeth into it. Ibrahim and Ben Omar, who had a cheerful expression on their faces, followed his example. Soon I was eating too, though the meat burned my fingers and the hot sauce ran down my hands. I devoured the goat meat with relish, making sure that the sauce did not drip onto the carpet of hides that covered the floor. Ibrahim was the first to scoop the rice. He dipped his fingers into it, pulled out a lump of rice, covered it with his other hand, and molded it into a ball. Holding it with his fingers, he dipped this ball into the meat sauce and gently sent it into his mouth. Everyone was slurping, but it didn't bother me at all. After a while, I started slurping myself because it meant that everyone was enjoying the food. Soon I learned to make rice balls. As lunch came to an end, Selena came into the room and, placing a bowl of water beside me, disappeared. Ben Omar smiled slyly and pointed to the bowl, throwing a rice ball into his mouth full of dazzling white teeth. "Wash your hands, amico," he said. "We'll have more water here than in El Gizzle." While I was washing the grease off my hands, Selena entered the room, silent as usual. After a few seconds, the bowls of food disappeared. When Selena reappeared, she brought in a silver coffee pot surrounded by tiny cups, and the air was filled with the deliciously sharp aroma of coffee, which made all the dangers that awaited me in the desert seem distant and unimportant. Ibrahim took out a Turkish hookah, and the smoking ceremony began unhurriedly. Ibrahim cut the tobacco leaves and put them in a bowl that stood on top of a glass vessel of water. With bronze tongs, he took a coal from the brazier beside him and placed it on top of the tobacco. Then he took a thin rubber tube, which was connected at one end to the glass vessel and had an ivory mouthpiece at the other end, and drew in air. There was a gurgling sound in the pipe, and thin streams of smoke escaped from Ibrahim's nostrils. As soon as the tobacco was lit, he removed the charcoal and held out the pipe with the mouthpiece to me. I shook my head and said, "No fumer, I don't smoke," to which Ibrahim was very surprised. "You don't smoke?" he asked me again, and looked at Ben Omar and Abdul, who laughed. I realized that Arabs loved the pipe more than anything else, even more than guns. The mouthpiece began to change hands, and it was time for a serious conversation. Abdul leaned forward slightly, gazing intensely at me. "You helped Ben Omar, friend, and you deserted your army. What's more, you nearly blew a hotel in Barca off the face of the earth, killing one German policeman and wounding another with a grenade explosion." I sat up straight, amazed that he knew everything. "You mean to say that a grenade explosion killed a policeman?" He nodded. "While you were asleep, Ibrahim went to Barca and found out everything." I looked at Ibrahim, who nodded in agreement, puffing on his pipe. "Now I see," Abdul continued, "why the Carabinieri ventured into the Arab quarter last night. One German policeman was killed, another wounded. The Italians were not happy about it. They are very afraid of angering the German command, who might accuse the Italians of being unable to control the situation in a city far from the front line. If the dead man had been an Italian, they wouldn't have paid much attention to it, but they will get a hard time for the death of a German." Abdul took the mouthpiece and sucked on it for a while, and then, letting out thick jets of smoke from his nostrils, continued. "So the Italian garrison was raised on alarm. The Italians put sentries everywhere. Roads leading in and out of the city have been sealed off for a distance of 3 kilometers from the city limits. All cars are searched. No man in German uniform can draw water from a public cistern without showing his papers for inspection. It's a good thing I ended up here and not in Barca," I said. Ben Omar handed me another cup of coffee. I must have been worried, because he said, "Don't worry, mate, you're here for me. Don't worry, mate, no one will find you here." I looked at him and asked, "Why then did you decide to take the risk of hiding me?" But Abdul interrupted me. "We will talk more about this. You are in danger of death. so we can speak plainly, for we are in exactly the same position as you. If the carabinieri capture us, we shall be shot." When he said that, I realized where I was. I remembered the crates of food and barrels of fuel in the Great Hall, the Italian army motorbikes, and the boxes of shells. I found myself in the hands of Arab bandits who were stealing weapons and selling them on the black market. I looked at Ben Omar and remembered that the Italian sergeant who had chained him to the wheel of his car had told me that this Arab had been captured for stealing weapons. And I realized that now I had nothing to fear. My masters, like me, were waiting to be shot. Abdul realized from the look on my face that I had guessed where and to whom I had gone. "We hate Italians," he said, "and we try to kill them at the first opportunity. We take away their guns and keep them in constant suspense, and when the time comes and we are well armed, we will strike." His voice became harsh, and there was a clear note of anger in it. "And how do you feel about the Germans?" I asked. I was very interested to know what they thought of my countrymen. Abdul did not answer at once, but then suddenly raised his head, and the scrutinizing gaze of his eyes met mine. "We kill them too," he said. I looked at him calmly, knowing that this did not apply to me. Any Arab, even a thief and a murderer, has his own code of honor. And if a man took advantage of his hospitality, drank coffee with him, and lived in his house, he would not touch a hair of that man's head. Ben Omar turned to me. "Believe me, friend, we don't hate the Germans, but we don't like the fact that they are helping the Italians. The Italians have killed, robbed, and abused our people, and you Germans have made their position even stronger than before. And if you win the war in Libya and defeat the British, the Italians will turn us into slaves. And then the fertile lands along the dry beds of Cyrenaica will be cultivated by foreign peasants, and we will have to retreat into the desert and lead a nomadic life there. So now, friend, we are helping the English in any way we can, in the hope that they will clear our country of Italians." The feelings Ben Omar had for the enemies of his homeland were clear to me. I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. Then, glancing at my hosts, I asked quietly, "If I want to leave here, will you let me go?" Ben Omar's hand came down on my shoulder. "You'll leave whenever you want, mate. None of us will stand in your way." I looked at the Arabs in silence. Ibrahim was staring at the floor. Abdul was smiling. But it was Ben Omar's open face that reassured me most of all, for all the feelings he was feeling were written on it. "Then I will stay with you for a while, if that is what you want," I said. "But the day will come when I shall leave. There is nothing for me to do here, and it is a long way from here to where I want to go." My words diffused the situation, and soon we were talking animatedly. As the night drew to a close, I felt that I had become their man, and when my new friends showed me the whole cave system, I realized that they were a force to be reckoned with. The Arabs were mainly engaged in attacking vehicles carrying military supplies. They stockpiled weapons and distributed them to ordinary Arabs. This was how they understood their patriotic duty. My new friends earned money by selling food on the black market. Their contacts with British reconnaissance units gave them a secure future, and by killing captured Italians, the Arabs quenched their hatred of the occupiers. Among the ammunition and vehicles captured by the Arabs, there were a few German ones, but mostly everything was of Italian manufacture. When I pointed this out, Abram explained to me that it was one thing to capture an Italian convoy, but quite another to capture a German convoy. Why? Because Italians always have a bottle of Chianti or a Madonna medallion at hand, but never a gun. They prefer to use their feet to flee, not their fingers to pull the trigger. Besides, he added, the Germans are much better armed. Instead of bottles, mandolins, and medallions, they have excellent weapons, and they know how to use them. He laughed loudly. Abdul slapped his thighs with force. "Remember the hotel in Barca?" he shrieked. "Why waste ammunition when you can throw a grenade down the stairs?" He explained, "You acted there just like the soldiers guarding the German convoy. Besides, they have 20mm guns on their trucks. not pea-shooting guns like the Italians. From the folds of his burqa, he pulled out a German parabellum and looked at it lovingly. "A fine gun," he said, and I could not help admiring the deep, fanatical love that the Arab has for his gun, stronger than for his bride. He would not sell it for any money. Ibrahim pulled out an American .44 caliber automatic pistol that was sticking out from behind the waistband of his burqa. "It's a good gun, but the parabellum is better," he said thoughtfully. I looked at Ben Omar, who grinned wryly and pulled a fearsome dagger from the wide sleeve of his burqa. Its steel shone and glistened in the light of the brazier. There was not a single spot on it. Ben Omar's eyes glittered, as did the steel of his dagger. As an expert in the blades captured from the Australians and others, I appreciated the dagger, but I also realized that Ben Omar was a very brave man, for to wield such a dagger you had to get close to the enemy. I turned to Abdul and said, "Please ask Selina to bring my automatic rifle." He clapped his hands. As if by magic, Selina appeared. In a few seconds she returned, carrying my heavy machine gun on her belt. I took it from the girl's hands, and the Arab's eyes shone with joy. It seemed to me for the first time that Selina was smiling at me under the yashmak. With a flick of my thumb, I unclipped the magazine and handed the machine to Ben Omar. Abdul reached out and took the magazine. He quickly removed the cartridges and pressed his fingers on the loading spring, checking it. 32 rounds, I explained. The set consists of 6 spare magazines, not counting the one in the machine gun. We have several Australian Owen assault rifles, Abdul said, but I can see that this one is better. I shook my head negatively. "No, Abdul, the Owen is better than ours. It's not very accurate at long range, but it doesn't malfunction at the worst possible moment," I explained, but he shook his head doubtfully. The author is flattering the Australians again. Owen's submachine gun, with its top-inserted magazine that obscures the view when firing, is clearly inferior to the German MP-38 and its modernized MP-40, one of the best submachine guns of the 20th century. Not a single war film can be made without the MP-40, which became one of the symbols of Germany at that time. Sometimes these machine guns are mistakenly called Schmeisser, but this was the name of the Stug 44 assault rifle of 1943/1944 designed by Hugo Schneisser. Ed. The assault rifle changed hands several times, and I couldn't help but notice the admiring yet greedy gleam in the Arabs' eyes. Had I not been their guest, they would no doubt have killed me to get hold of that machine gun. We talked until midnight, when Abdul got up and said he wanted to go to bed. Ben Omar took me to my room. As I walked through the main hall, I felt the chill of the night, but when Ben Omar pulled back the curtain so that I could enter my room, we were enveloped by the warmth of the smoldering embers in the brazier. Selina had lit the fire beforehand. Had she not done so, the room would have been quite chilly, especially since cold air was coming in through the hole in the wall. The flickering oil lamp gave a faint light, and I asked Ben Omar if this light and the glow of the brazier could be seen from the desert. "No, friend," he replied. "The light is very dim. You can only see it from one side and from a very long distance, because the cave is quite high up," he explained, and then added with some strange significance, "We call this room the guest room, and we often have guests." I stood beside him at the edge of the precipice and looked out over the desert, the surface of which seemed pale and vague under the starry sky. We could see very far away, and the smallest rocks and hills stood out as dark shadows against the lighter sand. "You said guests, Ben Omar," I said. "I take it you meant Englishmen on the scouting patrols, not Italians." "Yes, mate. You see, what other guests can we receive here but Englishmen? Everyone else is an enemy." Ben Omar spat in disgust and turned and walked to the middle of the room. "What a happy coincidence," he muttered. "It is the will of Allah." "What do you mean by that, Ben Omar?" I asked, throwing off my boots and pulling my overalls over my head. "That I saw your picture on the poster outside the town hall," he replied. I glanced at him quickly. He calmly continued. When I read what it said, I wanted to help you in gratitude for saving me by snatching me out of the hands of the Italian policeman. And here you are. I helped you and I paid you back. But this is not a mere coincidence. It is the will of Allah, and so be it, he finished. I was impressed by his sincerity, and I did not reply or contradict him. We will talk about all this tomorrow, my friend, said Ben Omar, and extended his hand to me. Until tomorrow, and good night. I shook his outstretched hand, and the curtain fell behind him. Ben Omar's words were still echoing in my ears as I sat down on my bed of leather cushions and thought deeply, staring at the flickering glow of the coals in the brazier. For the first time since Joseph's death, I felt at ease. I was no longer alone. I was surrounded by friends. I blew out the oil lamp and lay on my bed, watching the stars twinkle in the sky, and I fell asleep unnoticed. I woke up abruptly. I felt something soft and warm on my lips. The remnants of sleep fled me instantly, and I stared at Selina, whose face glowed faintly in the flickering glow of the dying embers. She took her hand away from my lips and ran her searching fingers along my neck. Numb with amazement, I stared at her. The lower part of her face was no longer hidden by the jasper, and she was quite beautiful. She looked about 16 years old. Her small, firm breasts protruded defiantly from beneath the thin fabric. There was desire and persistence in the kiss of this girl who had grown up in the desert. Never before in my life have I been so tempted. I am not a saint, but at that moment I had to fight desperately against myself. But it was not conscience that guided me, but caution. Selina, I whispered, what will your brothers say if they find you here? They would kill me, she exclaimed. Will they kill me too? No, you are a guest and a man. They won't accuse you of anything, but they will send you away. Unless, she looked at me confusedly, you want to stay here and marry me. My blood was boiling with desire, but I struggled to hold back. I can't stay here, I said sadly. I have a long way to go, and I could be killed any minute. But I love you, Tedesco, she exhaled. Don't say that, dear Selina, I whispered in the utmost despair. You don't know me at all. I am a complete stranger to you. Besides, how can I marry you if I am not a Muslim? You can become one, she said, pouting her lips. It's not so easy, I objected. I don't know what your faith is. I am not an Arab. I am a guest of your brother's, and I can't make love to you like a street girl. Oh, she sobbed. Don't say that. I'm not a whore to sleep with a man for money. But, oh, Tedesco, I shall never again meet a man with such fair hair and blue eyes as yours, and as brave. Brave? I asked again. No, Selina, I'm not brave at all. I'm running away from the war. Everyone is after me like a wild beast. I'm just desperate. I cannot love you and perhaps leave you with a child who, if I am killed, will have no father, and you no husband. Please, Selina, for your own sake, don't do what we both want so much, I exclaimed excitedly. There were tears in her eyes. Do you not like me at all? She whispered. No, I like you very much. You are a beauty, a real beauty, Selina. But there can be nothing between us but friendship. I'm a soldier, or was a soldier, because now I'm a hunted animal. I can't protect you. I can't stay with you. Please, Selina, go away quietly and... She pressed her tear-stained face to mine and kissed me passionately on the lips, and then, when I was almost out of control, she pulled away and whispered sadly, I suppose you are right, honorable stranger. I am only a foolish girl, and I should not disturb your peace while you are our guest. She went away as quietly as she had come. I could not sleep, and kept turning from side to side, thinking what a fool I had been to reject Allah's gift, when I might have only a few hours to live. What if it was a trick, and Selina had come here to test me? I wondered. Or perhaps her brothers, Abdul and Ben Omar, had sent her to me as the ultimate expression of hospitality. At the thought, I smiled. I remembered the street boy in Barca who had offered me his sister. Could my hosts have stooped to such a thing? No, they could not. They were true patriots of their country who would never forgive someone who treated their woman without respect. Foolish or not, I had rejected a sincere offer of love, and the girl would probably hate me now for not giving in to her charms. But the most important thing for me now was to survive, and that depended on my quickness of mind and my ability to make the right decisions. Finally, I fell asleep. When my bedroom was illuminated by the sun's rays, Selina entered modestly. Her face was covered by a jasper. She said coldly, "Breakfast is ready, honorable sinner, and my brothers are waiting for you." Then, with a reproachful glance at me, she disappeared behind the curtain that hung in the doorway. I spent nearly a fortnight in the mountain shelter of my Arab friends, hoping that the turmoil caused by my daring breakthrough would subside, for the German army had other, more important concerns besides catching the two missing deserters. I also hoped that, with no clue as to Joseph's whereabouts after our departure from El Adama, and after I had trashed the hotel in Barca, the military police, both German and Italian, would simply write us off as missing. At least the tension of the hunt had by this time eased, and it was probably safer for me to continue my journey to Benghazi to send my mother a letter and some belongings. I was bored sitting in that cave doing nothing, but rest and good food restored me to my fighting capacity. Selina often tried to seduce me when we happened to be alone, but I managed to resist her advances, feeling that I had enough problems without lovemaking. She was the only woman in this male society, which made her both more desirable to me and more valuable to the brothers and their gang, for while they were doing more serious work, she was the housekeeper in this gangster's den, lighting the lamps, keeping the fires burning, preparing the food and coffee. Though Italian propaganda called them Arab traitors, to their country and religion, they were the truest patriots. They were traitors only to the Italian conquerors, whose authority they refused to recognize. I was amazed at the scope of their activities. Abdul was the apparent leader, or sheikh. Ben Omar and Ibrahim were his assistants, but they had 50, perhaps more, men at their immediate disposal. If necessary, they could gather more among the nomadic tribes of the desert, as well as among the inhabitants of towns and villages. The Arabs usually came and went at night so as not to be detected by Italian reconnaissance aircraft or soldiers from observation posts on the mountain tops. This secret cave was known to many, but Ben Omar convinced me that all these people were reliable. They would not give us away under any torture. I hoped that was true. And at the same time, I knew very well that spies could get into the most secretive organizations, even governmental ones. There were usually a few armed men stationed near the cave as guards. They slept in their room, or in a warehouse, and cooked for themselves. They acted as sentries and took turns at the approach to the dry creek bed, watching the desert in case the enemy appeared. Twice during my stay in the cave, Abdul, Ibrahim, and Omar and their men raided Italian lorries on the road. The attacks were made at some distance from Barca, so that the enemy would not guess that the headquarters of the Company of Raiders Limited, as I called this organization of Arabs, was in Barca itself, and that their warehouse was in this cave. Often Abdul, Ben Omar, and Ibrahim, and sometimes Selina, would go on camel back to Barca, the Arab quarter, to obtain information about the movements of the Italian convoys and the disposition of the troops. I had no doubt whatsoever that these so-called traitors were in contact with British spies, and that the British intelligence services were giving them every assistance in preparing the Arab revolt against the Italians. Abdul told me that the commotion caused by my actions at the Hotel Barca had subsided after a few days, and that the road pickets put up by the Italian Carabinieri had been removed, but he showed me 2 other notices about me posted in the city, in which the reward for my capture had been increased. On these posters was my photograph, and in bold print the story of my escape, which I found entertaining. I had plenty of free time to go round the whole Arabian cave system, and it was indeed a system, with passages, crevices, nooks, corners, cellars, and halls. Everywhere tinned food was stored in large packages, and boxes of ammunition towered from floor to ceiling. One day, accompanied by Ben Omar, I left the cave, and we had walked several hundred yards along the bottom of a stony dry bed, when, to my surprise, he showed me another cave that served as a garage. Besides 2 German 3-ton Opel trucks, there was a British Morris armored car, and more than a dozen motorbikes. "Why do you need so many motorbikes?" I asked. He smiled coldly and said, "Messengers are easy prey, for they ride singly." He was right, and I was glad in my heart that I didn't have to travel as a messenger in the Barca area. Otherwise, the vultures would have cleaned my skeleton long ago, and the Arabs were traveling on my motorbike. The arsenal the Arabs had amassed was amazing, but the weapons and ammunition didn't just come from raids on convoys. Some were picked up on the battlefields of El Agheila, Es Salam, and El Makili. Almost every night men on camelback rode up to the cave with ammunition in bulks strapped to the camels' backs. They usually left well before dawn so as not to be seen by the Italian observers on the summits of El Akhdar, the low, up to 705 meters, mountain range in which our cave was located. The cave was located only a few miles from Barca, but to reach its entrance through a dry riverbed, we had to make a considerable detour across the desert and then up a canyon. The Arabs in the detachment used a shorter route that crossed the plateau, but it could only be traveled on camels. The camels were left tethered in a hollow enclosed by the mountains. Any vehicle traveling towards the cave could be seen and heard from afar. In any case, the Italians in motorized vehicles could not get here across the plateau, and the cave could only be approached from the desert side. For nothing I scrutinized the maps of the various parts of the desert that I had brought with me to headquarters when I fled. They covered the areas from Tripoli to the eastern Libyan border and on into Egypt to Mersa Matra. The southern part of the maps showed the Lake Chad area. I wondered at the interest of the German headquarters in terrain far to the south, up to 3,000 kilometers deep. It seemed impossible to me to move an army across this space covered with rocky and sandy deserts. Most of the battles in Libya had been fought close to the coast, with the exception of skirmishes between combat sentries in the neighborhood of El Jabouba, Jarabuba, and the oasis of Siwa, which had been abandoned by the Italians after they had been kicked in the neck by the British here. As I was unpacking my gear, I came across a box containing a sextant. To my dismay, when I opened it, I saw that the sighting lens and the bubble tube that set the horizontal position of the instrument were broken. But I had an excellent quality compass that worked perfectly inside the vehicle. This compass was almost unaffected by the metal parts of the vehicle. I showed the broken sextant to Abdul, Ben Omar, and Ibrahim, and asked them if they had ever come across such a device. They replied that they had not, and that they had no idea what it was. It took quite a while to explain. "It's used for locating things, like in the desert," I said. My words caused cheers and laughter among my friends. After all, any of them could be blindfolded and taken out into the desert, then unblindfolded and asked to find their home. And they would find it as if their black-haired heads were stuffed with radio navigation equipment. They asked to keep the broken sextant, promising that when they came across another long-range British scouting party, they would try to get one from them. It was then that Ibrahim asked me frankly, "Would you like us to tell the British that you are living with us?" When I heard that suggestion, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Do you want me to be stuffed with 7.7 millimeter bullets?" I asked. "Oh no, amico," Ibrahim said hastily. "The English won't do that. They'll just take you to their headquarters in Egypt." "Is that all?" I asked. "And then they'll send me to one of those concentration camps behind barbed wire that they set up during the Boer War?" "No, thank you. Even if I did desert from the German army, I have no desire at all to spend 10 years in a British prison. I intend to leave the area as soon as possible and go to Portuguese West Africa, that is, to a neutral country." "And what is this Boer War?" Ibrahim inquired. "It was fought in South Africa 40 years ago," I explained. The English wanted to take the gold and diamond mines away from the Dutch Boer settlers there, or something like that. And the English won? Abdul asked quietly. Yes, with great difficulty, I replied. 40 years ago, Ben Omar laughed. They must have fought with bows and arrows. My Arab friends loudly ridiculed the very possibility of such fighting. I had to laugh too, for although the Arabs were simple-minded, they were well-versed in the latest weapons and vehicles. Their outlaw company, Raiders Limited, had a dozen guys who could operate all the vehicles used by the armies fighting in North Africa. Abdul returned to the subject of my contact with British intelligence. You are a German, he said, but Germans are your enemies. Not all of them, I corrected him. Only the ones who want to kill me. They all want to kill you because you, like us, are a traitor. No, I objected. My position is different from yours. You've never been Italians, so you can't be considered traitors. You are patriots fighting against the conquerors of your country, and you are right to receive help from the English, or from anyone who would help you to get rid of the Italian yoke. But I am not a traitor either. I'm just a deserter. I left the army for personal reasons, but I have no intention of going over to the enemy's side or helping them in any way. I won't help the Germans, I won't help the Italians, and I certainly won't help the British. I want to be on the sidelines. The three Arabs looked at me understandingly and nodded, accepting my personal problem and predicament. I understand, Abdul said quietly. You would rather die trying to get across the Sahara to Portuguese West Africa than surrender to the English. That's right, Abdul, I assured him. Even if I surrender to an English scouting party, I will refuse to answer questions. But suppose they capture me and take me with them, and they themselves are then captured by German scouts, who also penetrate deeply into Egypt and southern Libya. What will happen to me then? A serious situation, Abdul laughed. Yes, much more serious. And they will put me against the wall to taste German bullets. No, my friend, I don't want that. I ask you not to tell the British that you have a German deserter. It might reflect badly on my health. Well then, of course, said Abdul, we won't tell anyone about you. You are our guest, and your wishes are our wishes. We are indebted to you for saving Ben Omar's life. The debt has been paid, I said, and you may forget it, for you saved my life by bringing me here and offering hospitality when I needed it. But now I am rested and ready to continue my journey. Stay with us a little longer, asked Ben Omar, until we tell you that the way to Benghazi is clear. I have enjoyed your hospitality too long already, I replied cordially. But remember that while I am here, I am a danger to you. The carabinieri, looking for me, may come to these mountains and find this cave. So much the worse for them, laughed Ben Omar. None of them will return to the base if they go that far. Well, I continued, now you know how I feel about English scouts. I must say that I should like to have a look at these adventurers snooping around Italian Libya far behind the front line. Couldn't I look at them without making contact and without them knowing that I am a German? That's impossible, Abdul said firmly. The others agreed with him, but I repeated my suggestion. Can't you disguise me as an Arab, I insisted, and take me to meet the English? Why? Abdul asked. Just out of sheer curiosity, I laughed, to look at the enemy and see how he acts. My hosts quickly discussed my request in Arabic. Then Abdul said, tomorrow night we have a meeting with the English not far from here, at the tomb of the Sheikh near Sidi Selim. Ebrim and Ben Omar will go there in a Morris armored car, which is in a cave garage down the stream. Can you drive that car? I can drive any car if I'm given a little practice, was my confident reply. I never doubted it, Abdul said. In that case, you will drive the Morris, disguised as an Arab, on one condition. And that is, I asked, when you meet the British, don't talk to them. Stay in the armored car and don't get involved in the conversation. Just act like a driver who is not interested in anything but his own business. I agree, I said with relief. I'll be the mute driver, the silent observer. It will be a pleasant ride through the desert. I'm tired of idleness here, and I'd like to see how wars are lost and won by secret organizations that are never reported in the news. Then tomorrow morning, said Abdul, try out the Morris in a dry river and do a thorough maintenance check before you go out at night. Then Selina will turn you into an Arab, and you'll be one of us. The next morning I went down the dry creek to the garage cave and spent several hours carefully checking the technical part of the armored car, which I believed had been given to Abdul by the British. I raced it up and down the stream for a few minutes to familiarize myself with the controls, as I realized that I would need quick reactions in the coming night foray through the desert in total darkness and over a difficult road. I found the Morris to be a good armored vehicle, but not very fast. I was struck by its tires. They were a huge size, and I couldn't imagine that they could get stuck in the sand. I now realized that it might be worth stocking up on some of these tires for the journey across the Sahara after I had sent a letter and parcel home from Benghazi. I would have to take every opportunity to acquire the necessary equipment. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I returned to the cave and told Ibrahim that the car was all right. The English have good equipment, he teased me. Yes, if it's serviced by a German, I countered. These little quips lifted the Arab spirits, though more often the expression on their faces was sullen, as if they were eager to cut someone's throat. This impression was deceptive, however. After all, life in the desert is rough and harsh, and it reflects on a person's face, whether they are tough or not. Well, let's go to your room, amico, said Ibrahim. I think Selina has already prepared everything. He showed the way. Selina was waiting for us. She pointed to the white burnie and the cloth for the head, said something to Ibrahim, and left us alone. Half an hour later, I glanced at myself in the rearview mirror that Ibrahim had grabbed from one of the lorries. I could barely contain a shiver when I saw my face. The iodine solution mixed with the other ingredients had done its job. Except for my blue eyes, which were even bluer against my dark skin, I looked like an Arab. My blonde hair was neatly tucked under a headdress held back by a camel's hair belt. My hands and arms were stained with iodine up to the elbows, and my feet and legs in old rope sandals looked ugly. A birunus is a comfortable garment, and although Ibrahim tied it too tightly round my neck, it was a nice change from shorts and a shirt. Ibrahim had also tied me a white girdle and completed it with an intimidating-looking Arabian dagger. In skillful hands it was a thug's weapon, but not in mine. I completed the disguise by slipping the parabellum behind my belt, leaving only the Arabian-style grip on the outside. Ibrahim looked at me mockingly. "The weapon is a bad idea," he said. "Why?" I asked. "Don't you take firearms with you?" He laughed. "Of course we do," he said, and winked. "But you might want to shoot at the English. You threw grenades at your men in the hotel." He thought his remark very funny and laughed out loud. We left the room and walked to the place where we usually had lunch. Ben Omar and Abdul were already sitting cross-legged by the brazier. The oil lamps were lit. Ben Omar looked up and was slightly dazed, which made Abdul look up too. "Salam alaikum." I greeted them, and Abdul's expression softened into a smile. Ben Omar stood up, took my hand and spun me round on my axis, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe his eyes. All three of us exchanged quick glances as I took my seat, sitting down in the Arabic way, cross-legged, and with the soles of my feet facing me. As far as tradition was concerned, I had learnt a lot from my hosts and could pass for an Arab if one did not look at me closely. My appearance satisfied everyone. "When you speak, amico, speak quickly," Ben Omar advised me. "If you have to break the silence, of course. But it is better not to speak at all, except in Italian." My Italian was far from perfect, but it was for the best. There were hardly any Arabs who spoke it fluently, and certainly none from the desert tribes, except those who worked in Italian offices and wore European clothes. "These English officers speak Arabic pretty well," Abdul told me. "If they address you, "You'd better answer in Italian." Turning to Ibram, he advised him to explain to the English, if necessary, that I was a member of the El Azizi tribe from the Tripoli area, and did not know very well the dialect that prevailed in the Barca area. The Seleucids. The Seleucid order ruled in the interior of Libya from the 1930s to 1932. Ed. Also had their own dialects of Arabic. In any case, I am only the driver of the Morris, and I am not obliged to participate in the negotiations between Ben Omar and Ibram and the British. After a quick snack, the three of us set off. I noticed that both Arabs were armed with pistols, and when we reached the Morris parking place, I saw a rolled-up camel skin in the back of the armored car, which had not been there when I left. Ibram unwrapped it, and to my surprise, a gleaming steel Bren assault rifle with a fully loaded magazine sticking out of the top and 6 more spares appeared. As I took my seat behind the wheel, I figured these desert guys were savvy enough not to rely on luck. Ibram took the automatic hidden in the camel skin and placed it on the floor, sitting down in the back. Ben Omar sat next to me. We drove slowly out of the dry riverbed, which was no easy task at all, considering the uneven and sloping surface, covered with rubble and stones, sometimes as tall as a man. Once we were in the desert, Ben Omar told me to drive close to the steep scree, as there was a danger of being spotted by Italian observers sitting on the plateau above. For half an hour, we looped along the foot of the cliff, skirting the scree, ducking into the shadows of overhanging rocks, passing round bends into other dry beds, and at last we got out into the desert and headed towards Sidi Selim and Sidi Bou Ravi. We then pulled onto the road and I increased my speed. Soon we reached a bend. Halfway round the bend we saw a motorbike with its headlight dimmed moving towards us. Both Arabs became alert. Abram handed the torch to Ben Omar, who immediately gave a short, powerful flash and ordered me to stop. I stopped before the motorbike came close to us. Ben Omar got out of the car. "Don't shoot," Ibram whispered as the motorbike stopped in a cloud of dust next to Ben Omar. A soldier in a Bersaglier uniform pronounced, "Show." But as he removed his goggles, he became worried when he realized he was in the company of Arabs. He did not have long to be alarmed. Ben Omar's blade flashed at his neck with the speed of lightning. A stream of blood splashed on the soldier's chest. His legs buckled, and he collapsed with the motorbike into the dust. With a careless movement of his foot, Ben Omar knocked out the glass of the headlight, and it went out. A shiver ran through my body. It wasn't the killing itself that struck me, but the ordinariness and skill with which it had been done. "Quick, help," Ben Omar hissed. Ibram had already jumped out of the car. I switched off the engine and jumped out too. The two Arabs expertly searched the Bersaglier's pockets, but apparently found nothing of interest. After making sure there was nothing left on the road, they dragged the body by the hands and left it lying in the desert. I lifted the motorbike onto its wheels and found that it was a good machine, a Guzzi, with spring suspension on the rear wheel, which made it easier to ride on the bumpy road. Ibram and Ben Omar didn't give me time to scrutinize the Italian machinery. The three of us lifted the motorbike and loaded it into the Morris. Ibram then summarized what had happened in one sentence: 1 motorbike minus driver and headlight. This was followed by a happy chuckle, as if the incident had been just an amusement, and we resumed our journey down the road. Personally, I wondered what would have happened if I had been on the wrong side of these Arabs, and after weighing up my chances of survival, I decided never to get too close to the dagger masters, as any argument with them could have badly affected my health. An hour later, we arrived at Sidi Selim, an unpopulated place, just a dot on the map where some sheikh's tomb was located. It was 10 kilometers from Barca, according to my maps. When the white tomb appeared in the night, close to the road, Ben Omar signaled me to slow down. We pulled off the motorway, rounded the tomb, and stopped. Ibram pulled a Bren assault rifle from his camel skin and picked it up, studying the dimly lit surroundings. Ben Omar said a few words to him. then got out of the car and walked toward the tomb. I listened for every sound, but except for the creak of pebbles under Ben Omar's feet, there was no sound in the deserted night. An owl's hoot came from somewhere, distinct and unexpected in this calm. I flinched, and my hand slid to the parabellum. Ibrahim patted me on the shoulder and said it was all right. Ben Omar dropped out of my sight in the darkness. But immediately, after the owl's second hoot, I saw 3 short torches in response to that signal. Soon I heard the creaking of stones, and then muffled voices from where Ben Omar was pointing the lantern. "The English," Ibrahim whispered. I nodded in response. I was tense and out of place, but it wasn't fear, but some kind of stiffness that gripped me. After the second torch signal, Ibrahim signaled me to start the engine and pointed out where to go. From excitement, the sound of the engine seemed too loud, and the gear lever was hard to the touch, but all this must have seemed exaggerated to me. Ibrahim's lips came close to my ear, and I heard the order not to leave the car. His words brought me back to reality, and I relaxed, remembering the role I'd been given. Another flash of lantern light marked the direction, and I saw the white burqa of Ben Omar. 2 other figures standing beside him became more clearly visible in the darkness, and as I slowed to a stop just ahead of them, Ibrahim jumped to the ground and strode forward. They exchanged handshakes and quiet phrases of "Salam alaikum." As I made no attempt to get out from behind the wheel, both Englishmen turned to me, and one raised his hand in greeting and cheerfully said, "Salam alaikum," to which I immediately replied, as seemed quite natural to me. Ben Omar and Ibrahim behaved as if I deserved nothing but salutation. Standing half-turned towards me, they began to speak rapidly to the English in Arabic. Both parties were absorbed in the conversation, and no one paid any attention to me except for occasional glances in my direction. Both Englishmen were dressed in khaki and black berets, the same as the German tankers. I tried to determine their ranks by the silver reflections of the cockades on their berets, but the darkness prevented me from doing so. One of the Englishmen held a Bren automatic under his arm. The other, a large man, evidently the elder, had a 6-shot revolver in a tightly flapped canvas holster, and on the strap that ran from the holster to his neck hung 2 hand grenades, in my opinion the most valuable of his weapons. I could not imagine how, if necessary, he would fire an obsolete revolver in a holster that had to be unbuttoned. The British were wearing the same shorts worn by the Sikh Indian soldiers of the Punjab as part of the British forces. These shorts could be rolled up to the ankles. I always liked these clothes. They kept my legs warm at night and were shorts and trousers at the same time. These trouser shorts were very popular with the German African Corps, and so many British prisoners were taken to the camps already without trousers. The big Englishman was wearing desert boots, in my opinion very comfortable and useful footwear, and knee-length khaki stockings, but the other was content with ordinary boots, and I imagined at once what a stench would go round if he tried to take them off. But I suppose that this was seldom the case, for the English were on the road most of the time. The rapid conversation continued, and I marveled at the ease with which the British spoke to my friends. I wondered if they spoke German, and I thought it would be a surprise to them if I forgot my promise and spoke, crowning my speech with a cheerful Heil Hitler. Suddenly Ben Omar laughed loudly, and continuing to talk, headed for the cars. The others followed him. My hand crept towards the parabellum, but the word motocicletta made me realize that they were not interested in me. The 2 Englishmen examined the motorbike, which the unfortunate Italian messenger had left us after his sudden and bloody demise. Examining the Englishman bent over the motorbike, I noticed the crowns on his patches and realized that I was in the Major's honorable company. After 10 minutes, the conversation suddenly stopped, and I heard the noise of engines in the distance. Everyone listened attentively, but no one seemed to be disturbed by it. Since the road was about 400 meters away from us, they thought it was a safe distance. But Ibrahim drew his camel-skin Bren, and there was a resounding click of the safety. Since we weren't moving, we were hard to distinguish from any other pile of rocks lying around. But it was possible to see our armored Morris. A lorry rumbled past, and through the noise of the engine the words of some Italian song could be heard. Soon this ghost of the Italian army disappeared in clouds of dust in the direction of Sidi Bouravi, where the barracks of the Tripolitan Horse and Camel Brigades were located. Neither the English nor the Arabs paid any further attention to the passing Italians. They continued their negotiations in Arabic, as if Mussolini's soldiers were nothing to them, and I was, perhaps, in complete agreement with them. After half an hour, the negotiations ended, and after solemn farewells and a carelessly tossed Salam Aleikum in my direction, the British left, disappearing into the night. The two Arabs stood listening, and when an owl's hooting was heard in the distance, they turned and climbed into the morass. Then Omar grinned discreetly. "Had you ever seen the English so close?" he asked. I said that I had not seen any during the war, except dead and prisoners, and that I was interested to see the men behaving, as if nothing had happened on the most dangerous march. Of course, I said I had met many Englishmen before the war when I was a sailor, but they spoke English, not Arabic. Then Omar signaled to start the engine, and we set off. We drove deep into the desert, where in the distance, black against the dark sky, we could barely make out the outline of the low mountains of El Akhdar. In 2 hours we were already traveling along our dry stream. I knew that I would soon leave this place and be left to myself again. Leaving the armored vehicle in the garage cave, we started to eat the dinner Selina had prepared for us. Abdul was also waiting for our return. Ibrahim and Ben Omar had reported to him on the negotiations, and he was pleased to see another motorbike in his already large fleet. We went to bed almost at dawn. When I woke up, the sun was already high. When I looked at my watch, I saw that it was almost noon, and I hastily jumped to my feet. Living with the Arabs, I had lost my former vigilance, but I knew that my holiday in this secluded place was coming to an end, and I picked up my pistol, which was lying on the bed beside me. From now on it would be my best friend again. The next thing I noticed was the discolored brown paint on my arms and legs. However, when I looked in the mirror, the reflection in it chased away all other thoughts. I wondered how to wash it all off now. I decided to ask Ibrahim. After all, I can't go through life dressed up as an Arab. As I put on my shorts and shirt, I sensed that something unusual was going on in the main cave. As I entered, I saw a dozen Arabs squatting by the ammunition boxes. Some were stuffing cartridges into ammunition pouches, others were packing machine gun belts. I was greeted with the customary Salam Aleikum, and the smiles on the faces of the boys, who noticed the paint on my face, arms, and legs, looked conspiratorial. Ibrahim beckoned to me, and I followed him into the cave where coffee was served. He told me that there was a big raid on a convoy of Italian food trucks. "Do you mean a convoy of lorries or one lorry?" I asked, thinking I had misunderstood. "No, a whole convoy of 14 lorries with food and weapons going to Derna," he replied calmly. His statement startled me. "How dare you attack a whole convoy? The whole coastal road is full of lorries from beginning to end. You will not have time to cut off one convoy before another one comes round the bend and shoots you all to death." I said. "Amico, there are many roads to Cyrenaica," he objected. "I know that, but the convoys take the Via Balbia, because it is a pretty good road." "Yes, it is," he agreed, and poured me some coffee. "But this convoy of 14 lorries will take the bypass to Martuva. 2 lorries will stay in Maroa, a few others in Slanta, and one will turn off the Martuva road to deliver supplies to the German observation post near El Jareri, where your men have set up a communication center. The rest will take the Derna bypass through Martuva. At least that's their orders. But we'll let them take the new route." The certainty with which Ibrahim spoke of the convoy routes, the location of military posts, and the number of trucks headed for specific points made me shudder. What was this rebel organization? And how widespread was the network of Arab agents? They must have their men in the Italian army headquarters who passed on to them accurate and timely information about the movements of the Italian convoys. I could not fathom the scope of all this, the intelligence system, and finally its function as a separate entity in the rebel organization. Now I finally understood why the British reconnaissance patrols could travel so far from their bases and feel comparatively safe. They were aided by the Arabs, who supplied the British scouts with the information they needed. The hatred of the Arabs for their Italian masters was truly boundless. Otherwise, they would not have organized such a strong resistance movement. Refilling my cup of coffee again, Ibrahim told me that they were going to attack the convoy 20 miles from Barca, where the Martuba road turns into rocky mountainous terrain and abounds in serpentine turns. I had not been on this road, but from Ibrahim's description and what I had learned from maps, I had a pretty clear idea of it. Dusty, rough, twisty, and steep, just made for ambushes. "Where is this convoy now?" I asked. "Still in Barca," Ibrahim replied, and smiled cynically. "The drivers are drinking red wine and sitting in the house of the signoritas." "Is there only one brothel in Barca?" I asked. "Yes, and the signoritas make a lot of money during the war," he said with a grin. "And when will the convoy leave town?" I asked in my usual tone, as if we were discussing the weather. 6 o'clock tonight," was the immediate reply. At these words I straightened up and looked perplexed at this son of the desert. I learnt it from an order sent to the major at the Meroa post by telephone. He explained, to satisfy the curiosity written on my face. I waved it all away and accepted the situation as it was. Everyone was aware of everything. "You see, amico, all military department phone conversations are recorded. The person who records them is an Arab Sinusite, and I have a bunch of blood brothers among them," Ibrahim said with an expression as if he was far away from here. Now I understood why a dozen Arabs in the main cave were equipping machine gun belts and stuffing ammunition pouches. "Tell me, Ibrahim," I asked, puzzled, "how can you drive from here more than 30 kilometers to the ambush site in broad daylight? Do you really think that the Italian observers on top of the mountain will not notice you? Everything has already been done, amico, hours ago," explained Ibrahim. "Abdul, Ben Omar and 40 men went to the place before dawn. They are now at the place where the convoy will be attacked. Everything has been thought out in advance, amico. We can't ride through the desert during the day without being detected." "And you?" I asked. "Oh, I'll leave later, when it's dark, and meet the others on the way back. My job is to cover their retreat," he explained. I couldn't help but admire the organization. One group attacking the convoy, another group meeting it, already with the spoils, on the way back, ensuring a safe return. Selena came in and placed a tray of cornmeal tortillas and cold meat in front of us. As we chewed our food, Ibrahim turned to me as if nothing had happened. "All our vehicles, I mean the Morris armored car and the 2 Opel trucks, have gone with the attack group. That means we'll need your Jeep Bedford for a cover operation at night. That's why I've ordered your stuff out of the vehicle, except for the machine gun on the dashboard. We're gonna have to use your car tonight." I didn't object. After all, I had enjoyed their hospitality and protection for quite some time. But what would I do if my Jeep was damaged? "It's a good car," Ibrahim said confidently. "Especially after you took the roof off the cab. You can take it, of course. But I'll need it tomorrow." "What for?" "I have to keep going. You know, Ibrahim, if you don't mind, I'll go with you tonight and drive my Jeep myself." "Are you going to come with us?" Ibrahim asked with obvious pleasure. "Yes, I will be interested to meet Abdul, Ben Omar, and the others on the way back." Ibrahim smiled, but suddenly grew serious when I added, "And when we get back, I will take my things and leave before dawn." "Ben Omar will be very upset, amico," he said. "But I can't stay here forever," I said. Ibrahim nodded understandingly. "Maybe it's for the best," he said thoughtfully. "Your men and Rommel seem to be gaining the upper hand in Libya, and if the British leave Egypt, you'll have nowhere to hide. What will you do then?" His words answered my thoughts. If I linger in the coastal area, My life will be in danger with the arrival of the German troops and the German administration, and I might soon find myself in a situation from which I would not be able to get out. I could imagine the noise that tonight's ambush would make. The neighborhood would be swarming with troops hunting the raiders. All it would take was for an informant who knew the location of the caves to whisper one word to whoever needed to know, and the Raiders Limited would be out of here like rats. The Arabs were well organized, well informed, and reasonably armed, but I saw no scope for their successful defense if German HQ found out where they were hiding. Ibrahim went to the main cave to see to the preparations of his little group. I went to where my Bedford stuff was lying and checked it. I wouldn't have time when I returned from my night hike with Ibrahim. Everything was in place. The water jerry cans were full. The petrol tanks were full too, and a separate container held 12.5 liters of machine oil. Back in my cave, I sat for a long time, looking at the desert through the opening in the wall and planning my actions for the next day. I would have to detour around Barca to fulfill my original plan of getting to Benghazi and sending a parcel to my mother's house. There I would be able to load the parcel directly onto the plane, bypassing the military sensors. From my past experience as a messenger, I knew the usual procedure pretty well. All mail from the front was unloaded at the military censorship department in Benghazi, where letters were read and parcels opened for inspection before being sent to Germany. The military police and the Gestapo would be only too glad to detain anything concerning me, especially when the censor had been warned concerning my letters. Anything sent in the usual way would not reach my mother, or she would get in trouble for mail that the authorities would become aware of. In depositing my mail on the plane to Germany, I got to know the crews of some of the planes, but the pilots probably did not remember my name. If any of them are familiar with the order for my arrest, they are unlikely to recognize me by sight. Despite the risk, I must send the parcel to Germany on a direct flight. Someone from the crew will take it with them and hand it in at the post office in my home country. There's no other chance. I can't even send my mother a postcard. And if anything happens to me, she will never know what made me desert. Selina entered the cave and sat down beside me. I realized that Ibrahim had informed her of my departure that night, and there was nothing more to talk about. I'd wondered what she was thinking right now. She just sat there looking at me. Was she thinking how things might have been? Ibrahim came in with a jug of olive oil. Smiling, he remarked that he had better give me back the appearance of a white man, as I was leaving, and the iodine coloring on my face, hands and feet had better be removed. It took over an hour to wash my face, and the warm oil had to be changed twice before I finished washing my feet and hands. After this procedure, no matter how many rags I used to wipe, my skin was still as slippery and glossy as a bronze statue. Shortly after sunset, I climbed into the driver's seat of my Jeep, and Ibrahim sat down beside me. 9 Arabs climbed into the back of the truck. I couldn't hold back a smile at the thought that this must have been the most heavily armed vehicle heading out into the desert night. All the Arabs had German or Italian carbines, with crossbody cartridges over their clothes, and a whole armory of pistols and daggers protruded from behind their sashes. In addition, there were 4 Breda machine guns and a small pile of ammunition in the back of the truck. My machine gun was also mounted in the front on an articulated rack, and Ibrahim was lovingly fingering it. I drove slowly out of the dry bed and further followed Ibrahim's directions, moving along the scree from one rock shadow to the next. I wondered how many weapons Abdul and Ben Omar had taken with them to attack the Italian convoy, if this group of 10 men a mere covering party, for which, if all went according to plan, no skirmish was intended, where rattling about with so many firearms and daggers. After an hour and a half we made a halt. On Ibrahim's orders, 2 of his men took a machine gun from the car and set up a rear guard post in the shadow of a cliff. We drove another 3 kilometers and came to a camel trail where the caravans were traveling. Here 2 more men with a machine gun took up position. 8 kilometers later, 2 more men with machine guns lay down near the Martab road, ready to meet the enemy. Abram explained that the post next to the Martuba road was set up to monitor all those who were returning from the ambush site, which was 13 kilometers away. Any Italian lorry that escaped the attack and headed for Barca to raise the alarm would be stopped here. The whole scheme was carefully planned. I made sure that the entire rebel escape route to the cave was securely covered at key points. There was no chance of a breakthrough for the Italians who had accidentally survived the attack. No wonder this gang had operated with impunity for so long. With such well-practiced tactics, they were the masters of the situation up to now. We drove forward about 7 kilometers and stopped at the dark foot of the hill, where, as Ibram had explained, there was a sharp turn in the Martuvan road. "How far is it from here to the ambush site?" I asked him. "About 7 kilometers, he replied. "Then you should already hear gunfire," I said. He shook his head. "The gorges and hills absorb sound. Unless an ammunition truck explodes, we won't hear anything." He was right, as I realized an hour later, when suddenly there was a growing noise of engines and truck after truck began to emerge from behind a dry stream, appearing only 1.5 kilometers away. Ibram beeped briefly with his lantern, and the lorries responded. "Ours," Ibram said triumphantly. We made no attempt to contact any of the vehicles that passed our position, but as the 12th truck passed, the lantern was signaled again, and Ibram said to me, "That's it." I started the engine, and our Jeep moved behind the column of trucks 1 kilometer behind as a rear guard. We picked up the 2 left by the Martuba track, then 2 at the Camel Trail, and on until we entered the dry river with the rebel cave base without any adventure. Not a single vehicle from the Italian convoy went back along the Martuba road, as 2 Arab observers relayed to me. The ambush had been a success. Selina was waiting for us in the cave with a cooked breakfast. There Abdul and Ben Omar told me that of the 14 trucks in the convoy, they had captured 10 plus their 2 Opels. The Morris armored car, which I had driven last night to negotiate with the British, had crashed, falling into a chasm in a narrow gorge, where it remained. Of the 40 Arabs who went out on the job, 32 returned home. 4 died in the gorge on the Morris and 4 in the ambush, in a firefight with the Italians. 1 Italian lorry was burnt out when a bullet hit the petrol tank, and 3 were disabled, but their cargo was carefully transferred to the Opels. "The Italians," said Abdul, "hardly resisted at all, and flowed into the mountains as soon as we opened fire. Only 3 of them were killed. We did not find any wounded." In my opinion, the attack on the convoy was masterfully executed. Being no mere desert raiders, these men planned and executed their attacks with a cunning and thoroughness that could not be resisted. When Ibram announced my intention to leave within the next hour, Abdul shook his head negatively. "Amico, if you go today, you will not get through. As the day progresses, hundreds of eyes will be watching the desert, and planes from Barca and Benghazi will be looking for the lorries we took away from the convoy. You will be spotted and intercepted immediately." "He's right, Amico," Ben Omar said. "The night is long gone. Our raid on the convoy will alarm the Bersagliers and the Italian Air Force, and possibly the Germans as well. If you leave now, you will go to certain death. And why do you want to leave us so soon?" My dear friends, I turn to all 3. From what I have seen today, it became clear to me the scope of your operations, and here I cannot feel safe. Pardon my frankness. There is no safety here for you either. The destruction of a convoy of 14 lorries will not leave even the Italian army indifferent. It won't go to waste. The Italians are vastly outnumbered and outgunned. They can send 1,000 or even 5,000 soldiers to find you and smoke you out of here. If the Italians can't do it themselves, they'll turn to the Germans for help. And that's really dangerous. Sooner or later, they'll get word of your hiding place. It doesn't matter how good your cave system is for defense or how well your sentries are set up. You can't expect to get away with the defeat of an entire convoy. So it seems clear to me that you will be locked up in your own fortress one of these days." The 3 Arab leaders looked at me seriously and stroked their beards as I spoke. Then Abdul said, "Friend, you have spoken the truth. We realize the danger, but we believe that Allah will protect us a little longer. If we are not discovered tomorrow, the Italians will gradually stop hunting. Then, when they least expect it, we will strike again. But I know that if we are sought and found here by the Germans, it will be a hard battle. In that case, your position with us will become very difficult. You won't be able to fight on our side against your own countrymen. I would not like that. Abdul, I said, I will try to fight my way through the German military police with fire. But that is not the same as coming to your side in alliance with the British to fight against the German fighting units. My stay here, as you realize, has become impossible. I am grateful for your hospitality, but now you have launched combat operations that are more than petty raids. And since I cannot repay your hospitality by joining your ranks, I must ask you to honor your promise to me when I got here and let me go on my way. You may go at any time. You know that. Abdul said quickly. We understand your situation. It is indeed very difficult, but I don't want you to go from here to certain death. So I advise you to stay here one more day until the Italians calm down a bit. Then, if you wish, you can leave at nightfall, and you'll be long gone by dawn. You speak wisely, friend, I agreed. I will take your advice and stay here another day, and leave tomorrow night. But why? Ibrahim asked. Do you want to cross the Sahara by car? If your jeep breaks down, you will die of thirst. You could leave here on camelback with the traders who often come to our caves to buy provisions and weapons for the Saharans. At our request, they will take you from tribe to tribe until you have traveled all the way to the Congo and then to Portuguese West Africa. You want to take a long journey of thousands of kilometers, too long for a car, and even through French and Belgian colonies where you might be arrested. Then Omar had been silent, but now he spoke. Yes, amico mio, you'd be better off traveling by camel than by jeep. Of course, this way will take many months, but it is much safer and more reliable. While I was pondering this suggestion, everyone was silent. Then I said, it is a generous offer to give me safe passage by camel caravan with your men. But I am not a good camel rider. I feel more confident on a vehicle with equipment I know, with an automatic rifle, a machine gun, and a parabellum as my best friends. My plan is to get to Benghazi first and send a letter and parcel to my mother, so that she knows the reason for my desertion from the Wehrmacht. To do this, I have to go by car in my German uniform. I may be arrested, but I will have to take the risk. But if in Benghazi I cannot get what I need, big tires and plenty of water and patrol to cross the Sahara, then perhaps I will reappear in the Arab quarter of Barca and ask you to attach me to some camel caravan. All right, Abdul said briefly, it's a deal. It is clear, I added, that I cannot accept the hospitality of the desert tribes without paying for it. They are strangers to me, but I will pay them well if they let me travel with them. I have enough money for that. Money is not everything, Abdul commented. Friendship is more important. That was the end of our conversation, and we went to bed. It was not long before dawn.